"You're coming with me," the rancher said, after finding the young woman abandoned by her family for refusing an arranged marriage. The buzzards were already circling when Jake spotted them, black specks spinning over red rock, waiting for something to die. He'd been tracking a wounded deer for near 2 hours, following blood drops across the rocky ground when those birds caught his eye. Buzzards meant death was coming, and in this godforsaken piece of Arizona territory, that death was usually human. Jake pulled up his horse and squinted against the afternoon sun. The birds wheeled lower now, their shadows dancing across the sagebrush and scattered rocks. He'd lived alone in these mountains for 8 years, ever since the war ended, and he'd seen enough of what men could do to each other. He kept to himself, trapped and hunted, traded his furs in town maybe twice a year, and that was plenty of human contact for him. But something about those birds made his chest tighten with old dread. He spurred his horse forward, following a game trail that wound between towering red rocks and patches of scrub oak. The air was thin up here, dry enough to crack lips and burn lungs, but Jake had grown used to it. What he wasn't used to was the sound that reached him as he topped a small ridge, a sound so soft he almost missed it beneath the whisper of wind through stone. A whimper, weak and desperate, like a hurt animal trying not to draw attention. Jake climbed down and tied his horse to a twisted juniper. He moved careful-like, boots silent on the rocky ground, rifle loose in his hands but ready. The sound came again, and this time he knew it wasn't no animal. It was human, female, and close. He found her tucked between 2 big boulders, a natural shelter that might have saved her life if she'd had any strength left to care about it. She lay curled on her side, knees drawn up to her chest, wearing a torn blue dress that once had been pretty. Her dark hair was matted with dirt and blood, her lips cracked and white with thirst, but it was her eyes that hit him like a punch to the gut. They were open, staring at nothing, filled with a kind of emptiness that spoke of betrayal so deep it had carved something important right out of her soul. She couldn't have been more than 20, maybe younger. Her face was thin with hunger and fever, her skin burning hot when Jake knelt beside her and pressed the back of his hand to her forehead. She didn't flinch at his touch, didn't even seem to know he was there. That worried him more than the fever or the clear signs she'd been left to die. "Miss," he said, quiet-like, his voice rusty from not talking much. "Miss, can you hear me?" Her eyes moved toward his face, unfocused but aware. Her lips moved, but no sound came out. Jake uncapped his canteen and tilted it careful to her mouth, letting just a few drops fall onto her tongue. She swallowed without thinking, then tried to grab for the canteen with hands that shook like leaves. "Easy," Jake said soft, holding her head with one hand while he gave her small sips of water. She drank like a woman dying of thirst, water running down her chin and soaking into her ruined dress collar. When she'd had enough to wet her throat, she tried to speak again. This time the words came out barely a whisper, hoarse and broken. "Please don't take me back." Jake felt something cold settle in his stomach. The way she said it, the terror in those 4 words told him everything he needed to know about how she'd ended up here. Someone had left her to die, someone she'd trusted, someone who should have protected her. "I ain't taking you anywhere you don't want to go," and he meant every word. "But you're hurt bad, miss. You need doctoring." She shook her head hard, trying to sit up and failing. "No doctor, no town. They'll find me. They'll make me go back." "Who will?" Her eyes filled with tears she was too dried out to shed. "My family, my pa," her voice broke on the word. "I wouldn't marry him, the man they picked. He's old and mean, and he already buried 2 wives, and I said no. I said no, and they brought me here and left me to think it over, to come to my senses." She laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "They said if I changed my mind, if I agreed to be good, I could walk home and beg forgiveness. If not," she gestured weak at the empty country around them. Jake felt old anger building in his chest, the same cold fury that had kept him alive through 3 years of war. He'd thought he'd left that anger behind in the mountains, but some things could still wake it up. The idea of a father, of any man, leaving a young woman to die alone in the desert because she wouldn't be sold like cattle made his hands clench into fists. "How long you been out here?" he asked, keeping his voice gentle despite the storm brewing inside him. 3 or 4 days, I think. Maybe 4. Hard to tell. The sun keeps coming up and going down. I stopped counting. 3 or 4 days without food, with only whatever water she might have found in rock pools after the last rain. It was a miracle she was breathing at all. Jake looked around at the harsh country, thinking of her wandering lost and alone, probably calling for help until her voice gave out, probably believing right up to the end that her family would come back for her. "What's your name?" he asked. "Belle." She opened her eyes and looked at him proper the first time since he'd found her. "Belle Hawthorne. I'm Jake Colter, and I'm getting you out of here." She tried to shake her head again, but the movement made her wince. "I can't pay you. I don't have nothing. I didn't ask for payment." "Then why?" Jake thought about the question. Why was he willing to get mixed up in what was clearly family business, the kind of mess that could follow a man and mess up his carefully simple life? He looked at Belle's face, at the fear and pain carved into features that should have been bright with youth and hope, and knew he'd already made his choice the moment he'd heard that first desperate whimper. "Because leaving you here would be wrong," he said simple, "and I've seen enough wrong things for one lifetime." Before you dive deeper into Belle and Jake's journey, hit that subscribe button so you don't miss how this story plays out, and drop a comment telling us where in this wide world you're watching from. I love knowing how far these frontier tales travel. Belle tried to sit up again, determined this time, despite her weakness. Jake slipped an arm behind her shoulders and helped her, noting how little she weighed, how her bones shone sharp beneath her skin. She'd been beautiful once, he could see that even now. The kind of beauty that caught men's attention and made fathers see dollar signs instead of daughters. "You don't understand," she whispered urgent. "My pa, Samuel Hawthorne, he owns half the territory south of here. He has men who work for him, men who do whatever he tells them to do. If he finds out you help me—" "Let me worry about your pa. You don't know what he can do." Jake looked at her steady. "Miss, I spent 3 years in the war watching men do terrible things to each other for reasons they barely understood. I've seen what people can do when they decide someone else's life belongs to them. Your pa doesn't scare me." Something in his tone must have convinced her, because she sagged against his arm, some of the desperate tension leaving her body. "Where will you take me?" "My place. It ain't much, but it's safe, and it's got walls and a roof. You can rest there, get your strength back, figure out what you want to do next." "And if I never want to go back? If I never want to see any of them again?" Jake helped her stand, taking most of her weight as her legs shook beneath her. "That's your choice to make, not theirs." She looked up at him, searching his face for some sign he was lying or had hidden reasons. Jake had grown used to being alone, used to his own company and the simple honesty of dealing with animals and weather and the basic needs of staying alive. He wasn't good with fancy words or promises, but he could offer her the one thing her family had taken away. "I mean it," he said. "Whatever you decide, I'll stand by it. That's a promise." For the first time since he'd found her, Belle smiled. It was small and fragile, barely there at all, but it changed her whole face. "Thank you," she whispered. Jake nodded and scooped her up in his arms, surprised again by how little she weighed. She was nothing but bones and grit wrapped in torn blue fabric. As he carried her toward his horse, she rested her head against his shoulder, and he felt some of the loneliness he'd been carrying for 8 years start to ease. "You're coming with me," he said, quiet, more to himself than to her. But Belle heard it, and for the first time in days, she felt something that might have been hope. Before you dive deeper into Belle and Jake's journey, hit that subscribe button so you don't miss how this story plays out. And drop a comment telling us where in this wide world you're watching from. I love knowing how far these frontier tales travel. The ride back to his cabin took 2 hours, Jake walking alongside his horse to keep from jarring Belle too much. She drifted in and out, sometimes talking fever words he couldn't catch, sometimes gripping his shirt with desperate fingers like she was afraid he might disappear. By the time they reached his small valley, hidden deep in the mountains and reachable only by a narrow trail he'd cut himself, the sun was setting and her fever had gotten worse. His cabin was rough but solid, built from pine logs he'd cut and shaped himself. One room with a stone fireplace, a wooden bed he'd made during his first winter, a table and 2 chairs, shelves lined with books he'd brought from his old life. It wasn't much, but it was his, every board and stone placed exactly where he wanted it. Jake kicked open the door and carried Belle inside, laying her gentle on his bed. She was shivering now, despite the fever, her teeth chattering as chills shook her thin frame. He built up the fire quick, then filled a pot with water from the well outside and set it to heat. From a wooden chest in the corner, he pulled out clean blankets and a spare shirt that would be huge on her but warmer than her torn dress. "I need to get you out of these wet clothes," Jake said, then caught himself and stepped back. "I mean, you need to change. I'll turn around." Belle nodded weak, understanding. Jake faced the fireplace while she struggled out of her ruined dress, the sound of tearing cloth telling him how badly damaged it was. When she whispered that she was done, he turned to see her swallowed by his flannel shirt, the sleeves hanging past her fingertips, the hem reaching almost to her knees. Despite everything, she looked younger now, more fragile, and Jake felt a fierce need to protect her rise in his chest. He helped her back into bed and piled blankets on top of her, then brought her broth made from jerky and wild onions he'd stored for winter. She could barely keep her eyes open, but she managed a few spoonfuls before sleep took her completely. For the next 3 days, Belle burned with fever. Jake barely slept, cooling her face with damp cloths, forcing water and broth between her lips whenever she was awake enough to swallow. She talked in her fever dreams, bits and pieces of memory and pain that painted a picture of her life before this moment. She spoke of her ma, dead these 5 years from a fever not unlike the one Belle fought now. She whispered about her younger sister, married off at 16 to a man twice her age. She cried out against her pa's voice, always demanding she obey, always reminding his daughters that their job was to make good marriages, to trade their youth and freedom for deals that would expand his holdings. And she spoke of Edgar Hartwell, the man her pa had picked for her. 60 years old, with hands like leather and breath that reeked of whiskey and rot. A man who'd beaten his first wife so bad she'd lost 3 babies before they could be born. Who'd worked his second wife to death running his house and caring for his grown sons who treated her like hired help. Belle had met him twice, both times in her pa's parlor with her pa watching, and both times Hartwell had looked at her like she was a horse he was thinking about buying. "He asked to see my teeth," Belle mumbled through cracked lips during one fevered moment. "Asked if I was strong enough to bear sons. Pa just nodded like that was normal, like I was livestock at market." Jake squeezed out the cloth he'd been using to cool her forehead and felt that cold anger building again. The war had taught him that evil usually dressed itself up in respectability, that the worst cruelty often came from men who thought of themselves as pillars of the community. Samuel Hawthorne probably sat in the front pew at church every Sunday, probably gave speeches about family values and moral character, all while selling his daughter to the highest bidder. On the 4th morning, Belle's fever broke. Jake woke to find her sitting up in bed, weak but clear-eyed, looking around the cabin with the focused attention of someone truly seeing her surroundings for the first time. The morning sun streamed through the single window, lighting up dust motes that danced in the golden air. "You stayed," she said soft when she noticed him watching her from his chair by the fire. "Where else would I go?" She smiled, and this time it reached her eyes. "Most men would have taken me to town, dropped me at the doctor's office or the church, let someone else deal with the trouble. I ain't most men." "No," she agreed, studying his face. "You're not." Jake stood and ladled oatmeal into a bowl, adding honey he'd traded for in town the fall before. "You need to eat, build your strength back up." Belle took the bowl grateful, eating slow but steady. When she was finished, she looked up at him with an expression she couldn't quite read. Why did you really help me, Jake? And don't say it's because leaving me would be wrong. There's something else." Jake was quiet for a long moment, staring into the fire. He'd asked himself that same question during those long nights of fever watch, and the answer had surprised him. "I had a sister once, Mary. She was 2 years younger than me, prettiest girl in 3 counties. When the war started, I left her with our folks, figured they'd keep her safe until I got back. But while I was gone, our pa decided she should marry his business partner, a man old enough to be her grandfather. Mary tried to say no, tried to run away 2 times, but they kept bringing her back. Finally, she stopped fighting, married him like they wanted." Jake paused, his jaw working. "She died 6 months later. Childbirth, they said, but I knew better. She'd given up, stopped wanting to live. I got home just in time for the funeral." Belle reached out and touched his hand. "I'm sorry. She was trapped, and I wasn't there to help her find a way out. When I found you in those rocks, heard you begging not to be taken back, it was like Mary was asking me for help all over again. This time, I could do something about it." They sat in comfortable silence while Belle finished her meal. Outside, a hawk cried somewhere high above the trees, and the sound seemed a reminder of the world beyond these walls, the world she'd run from. "They'll come looking for me eventually. My pa won't let this stand. In his mind, I'm his property, and stealing is stealing, whether it's horses or daughters. Let 'em come. Jake, you don't understand. He has money, influence. He could make life real difficult for you." "He could try." Something in his tone made her look at him closer. "You're not afraid of him?" "No, ma'am, I'm not. I got a few advantages your pa don't know about." "Such as?" Jake smiled, but it wasn't a pleasant look. "I'm real good at making problems disappear. It's a skill you pick up in war, and it doesn't go away just because the fighting stops." Belle felt a chill that had nothing to do with her recent fever. She was looking at a different man now, someone harder and more dangerous than the gentle soul who'd nursed her through her sickness. But strangely, the change didn't frighten her. If anything, it made her feel safer. "What do you want me to do?" "Get well, get strong, then decide what kind of life you want to build for yourself." "And if I want to stay here, with you?" The question hung between them like smoke. Jake had lived alone for so long that the idea of permanent company should have scared him. Instead, he found himself hoping she meant it. "This ain't an easy life," he said, careful. "Winters are long and cold, summers are dry and hot. The nearest neighbor is 15 miles away, and some weeks you don't see another living soul. It gets lonely." "I've been lonely in rooms full of people. At least here I'd be lonely by choice." Jake nodded slow. "Then you're welcome to stay as long as you want, but I won't hold you to it. If you change your mind, want something different, you're free to go, no questions asked." "What about you? What do you want?" The honest answer was that he wanted her to stay, wanted to wake up every morning knowing she was there, wanted to share his meals and his books and his quiet life with someone who understood what it meant to choose solitude over compromise. But he also knew that what he wanted couldn't matter as much as what she needed. "I want you to be happy," he said, simple. "Everything else is just details." Belle felt tears prick her eyes, the first tears she'd been able to shed since her fever broke. No one had ever said anything like that to her before. No one had ever put her happiness above their own wants or expectations. "I think I'd like to try staying," she whispered, "if you're sure you don't mind." "I'm sure." For the next 2 weeks, they settled into a routine that felt surprisingly natural. Belle got her strength back slow, helping with simple tasks around the cabin, learning to cook on the wood stove, mending Jake's shirts and her own makeshift wardrobe. Jake taught her to read the weather, to know the calls of different birds, to find the best spots for collecting wild berries and healing plants. In the evenings, they sat by the fire and talked. Belle told him about her childhood, the parts that had been good, before her pa's obsession with profitable marriages consumed everything. Jake shared stories from before the war, his dreams of becoming a teacher, his love of books and learning. They discovered they both enjoyed Shakespeare, though for different reasons, and spent hours discussing the plays they'd both read. It was peaceful in a way neither of them had expected. Belle began to sleep through the night without nightmares. Jake found himself looking forward to meal times, to having someone to share his thoughts about the changing seasons, to the simple pleasure of not being alone with his thoughts. But peace in the wilderness is always temporary, and theirs ended on a crisp morning in early autumn when the sound of hoofbeats echoed up the mountain trail. Jake heard them first, his soldier's instincts alert to any disturbance in the natural rhythm of his domain. He counted at least 4 horses, maybe more, moving steady up the narrow path that led to his cabin. No one came this way by accident. No one even knew this place existed unless they'd been looking for it specific. "Belle," he called quiet, and she appeared in the doorway, her face already pale with understanding. "How many?" she asked. 4, maybe 5. Could be more. Belle closed her eyes for a moment, gathering herself. When she opened them again, Jake saw not fear, but resignation, like this moment had always been coming. "What do you want to do?" "Face them. I can't run forever, and I won't let you fight my battles for me. This became my battle the moment I decided to help you." Before Belle could argue, the riders topped the final rise and came into view of the cabin. Jake counted 5 men, all well-mounted and armed. The man in the lead was older, thick through the middle, but still commanding in the saddle, with iron gray hair and eyes like winter sky. Samuel Hawthorne, no doubt about it. The resemblance to Belle was clear, though where her features suggested gentleness, his spoke only of stubborn will and absolute certainty in his own righteousness. The other 4 were younger, harder-looking men with the kind of casual violence that comes from never being told no. They spread out slightly as they approached, a formation that spoke of experience in situations like this. Jake stepped onto the porch, rifle in his hands, but not raised. Belle appeared beside him, and he heard her father's sharp intake of breath at the sight of her in Jake's oversized clothes, her hair loose around her shoulders, looking like a woman who'd been living in sin. "Belle Marie Hawthorne," Samuel's voice carried clear across the small clearing. "You will come home with me now, and we will speak no more of this foolishness." "I won't," Belle replied, her voice steady despite the tremor Jake could feel running through her body. "I'm not going anywhere with you." Samuel's face darkened. "You are my daughter, and you will obey me. This display of rebellion has gone on long enough." "This ain't rebellion, Pa. This is me choosing my own life." "You don't have that choice to make. You're a woman, and a woman's place is determined by her father until she marries, then by her husband. Edgar Hartwell is waiting for you. The wedding will happen as planned." "No." The single word hung in the air like a gunshot. Samuel's face went red to purple, and Jake saw his hand move toward the pistol at his hip. "You kidnapped my daughter," Samuel said, his attention shifting to Jake. "Took her against her will, defiled her, turned her against her family. That's a hanging offense in this territory." "I didn't kidnap nobody," Jake replied, calm. "Found her dying in the desert where someone left her. Brought her here to recover. She's free to leave any time she wants." "She's coming with us now." "No, sir, she ain't. Not unless she says so." One of the younger men, a lean wolf of a person with scars on his knuckles and cruelty in his smile, urged his horse forward. "We didn't come here to debate, mountain man. We came to collect what belongs to Mr. Hawthorne." "She don't belong to anybody," Jake said, and something in his tone made the man's horse shy sideways. "She's a free woman making her own choices." "Free?" Samuel laughed harsh. "She's ruined goods now, damaged merchandise. No decent man will have her after living here with you in sin. Edgar Hartwell is the only man generous enough to overlook her shame and even he's requiring a reduced bride price given the circumstances. Belle made a sound like she'd been struck. Jake felt his grip tighten on the rifle, felt the cold calculation of violence settling over him like an old coat. "There ain't no shame in survivin'," he said quiet. "No shame in choosing kindness over cruelty, freedom over slavery." "Slavery?" Samuel's voice rose to near a shout. "I'm her father. I fed her, clothed her, educated her, all so she could make a good marriage that would secure her future. This is how she repays that investment? By thinking for herself? By refusing to be sold to a man who beats his wives? Yes, sir, I'd say that's exactly how a woman with any sense would repay that kind of investment." The scarred man's hand dropped to his gun. "You got a smart mouth, mister. Maybe we should do something about that." Jake smiled, and Belle felt her blood turn to ice. She was seeing the soldier now, the man who'd survived 3 years of the worst war in American history, the man who'd learned to kill efficiently and without hesitation. "You're welcome to try," Jake said, conversational, "but you should know that I can put 5 bullets in 5 different targets before any of you clear leather. It ain't a boast, it's just a fact." The threat hung in the air like smoke from a distant fire. Samuel studied Jake with new attention, taking in the way he held the rifle, the casual confidence in his posture, the absolute stillness that marked a man who'd been tested by violence and come out on top. "What's your name?" Samuel asked. "Jake Colter." "Colter." Samuel rolled the name around in his mouth like he was tasting something bitter. "I've heard that name. You were at Gettysburg, weren't you? With the Pennsylvania regiment that held the line on the second day?" Jake nodded once. "They say you killed 20 Confederate soldiers single-handed when they overran your position." "They say a lot of things." Samuel was quiet for a moment, reassessing the situation. His daughter stood beside a man who'd earned a reputation for deadly skill in the worst fighting of the war. A man who'd chosen to live alone in the mountains, who clearly had no fear of confrontation, who spoke with the calm certainty of someone who'd faced death too many times to be impressed by threats. But Samuel Hawthorne hadn't become one of the most powerful men in the territory by backing down from fights, even when the odds weren't in his favor. "Belle," he said, his voice taking on a different tone, softer, but somehow more dangerous. "Come here to me, daughter. We'll go home and we'll forget this ever happened. Edgar is a good man who'll treat you well if you give him the chance." "No, Pa." Belle's voice was stronger now, more certain. "Edgar Hartwell killed his wives as sure as if he'd shot them. I won't be the 3rd woman to die in his house." "You'll die an old maid if you stay here. Is that what you want? To waste your youth on a man who can't even give you a proper home, children, security? I want to choose my own path. I want to wake up each morning knowing I'm where I want to be, not where someone else decided I should be." Samuel's patience finally snapped. "Take her," he ordered his men. The scarred man spurred his horse forward, reaching for Belle. Jake moved with the fluid precision of a man who'd trained for moments exactly like this, bringing the rifle to his shoulder and firing in one smooth motion. The bullet took the man in the shoulder, spinning him out of the saddle to land hard in the dirt. Before the echo of the first shot died, he'd worked the lever and aimed at the second man. "Anyone else want to try?" The remaining 3 riders sat frozen, hands hovering near their weapons, but not quite willing to draw them. Their wounded companion writhed in the dirt, cursing and holding his shoulder. "She chose her own path," Jake said clear in the sudden silence. "You'll respect it or answer to me." Samuel stared at his bleeding employee, then at Jake, then at his daughter. "This ain't over," he said finally. "Yes, it is," Belle replied. "I ain't your little girl anymore, Pa. I ain't your property to trade or sell. I'm a woman making my own decisions. And my decision is to stay here with a man who sees me as a person, not a commodity." Samuel's face was stone. "You're dead to me. All of you are dead to me." He wheeled his horse around and rode away, his men following after they'd helped their wounded companion back into the saddle. The sound of hoofbeats faded down the mountain, leaving Jake and Belle alone in the sudden quiet. Belle was shaking, whether from fear or relief or anger, Jake couldn't tell. He set his rifle aside and gathered her into his arms, feeling her tension slowly melt away as she buried her face against his chest. "It's over," he said soft into her hair. "It's really over." She pulled back to look at him, her eyes bright with tears she refused to shed. "He meant it when he said I was dead to him. I'll never be able to go back, never see my sister again." "Do you want to go back?" "No, but it hurts to know the door is closed forever." Jake nodded, understanding. Sometimes the hardest part of choosing your own path is accepting that you can't walk two roads at once. That evening they sat on the porch and watched the sun set behind the mountains. The air was crisp with the promise of winter, and somewhere in the distance a wolf howled, calling to its pack. Belle leaned against Jake's shoulder, feeling something settle inside her chest, something that might have been peace. "What happens now?" she asked. "Now we build the life you want, whatever that looks like. I want something simple. I want to wake up next to someone who chooses me every day, not because he has to, but because he wants to. I want children someday, but only with a man who will teach them that their worth ain't measured by their usefulness to others. I want to grow old somewhere beautiful with someone who makes me laugh." Jake was quiet for a long moment. "That sounds like a good life. Do you think it's possible? For us?" He turned to look at her, seeing not the broken girl he'd found in the desert, but the strong woman she'd become, the woman who'd faced down her father and chosen her own future despite the cost. "Belle Hawthorne," he said, formal, "would you do me the honor of building that life with me?" She smiled, and it was like watching the sun rise. "Jake Colter, I thought you'd never ask." They were married 3 weeks later by a traveling preacher who asked no questions about Belle's past or lack of family in attendance. Mrs. Henderson from the general store stood as witness, along with her husband who played fiddle for the small celebration afterward. The wedding was simple, nothing like the elaborate ceremony Belle's father had planned for her marriage to Edgar Hartwell. She wore a blue dress Mrs. Henderson had helped her sew, and Jake wore his best shirt with a vest he'd bought special for the occasion. They exchanged plain gold bands Jake had ordered from town, and when the preacher asked if they promised to love and honor each other, their "I do" rang clear and true in the small mountain church. That night, as they sat before their fire in their cabin, Belle finally allowed herself to believe that she was truly free. Free to love who she chose, free to build the kind of life she wanted, free to be seen and valued for who she was, rather than what she could provide to others. "No regrets?" Jake asked, like he was reading her thoughts. "None," she replied without hesitation. "This is exactly where I want to be." Outside, the first snow of winter began to fall, soft and silent, covering their small valley in clean white. Inside, the fire burned warm and steady, casting dancing shadows on the walls of the home they'd built together through choice rather than obligation. Belle Colter fell asleep that night with her head on her husband's shoulder, dreaming not of the life that had been planned for her, but of the life she dared to choose for herself. And for the first time since her mother's death, her dreams were filled with nothing but hope. The seasons turned like pages in a book neither of them wanted to finish reading. Spring brought wildflowers to their meadow, and the sound of Belle's laughter as she chased butterflies while Jake worked in the garden they'd planted together. Summer brought long evenings on the porch, reading aloud to each other as fireflies danced in the growing dusk. And autumn brought news that would test everything they'd built. The letter came with a supply trader who made the mountain circuit twice a year. Belle recognized the handwriting right away, though she hadn't seen it over a year. Her sister Emma, writing in secret, her words careful but urgent. Pa's been asking questions about you. He hired men to watch the mountain trails to see if you ever come down to town. Edgar Hartwell is pressing him about the dowry money he was promised. Pa's telling everyone you died in the desert, but I don't think he believes it himself. He's grown harder since you left, meaner. Yesterday he struck me for asking about you, said your name was not to be spoken in his house ever again. I'm scared, Belle. He's arranged a marriage for me with Hartwell's eldest son, a man who drinks too much and has cruel hands. I don't know what to do. Belle's hands shook as she read the words. Jake found her on the porch that evening, staring at the letter like it might change if she looked at it long enough. She needs help, Belle said without looking up. Emma, she's only 18, and Pa's going to sell her to monsters just like he tried to do to me. Jake sat beside her, reading over her shoulder. What do you want to do? I don't know. If I go back, even just to help her, Pa will try to force me to stay. He might succeed this time. He has more men now, and he knows where to find us. Then we don't go back. We bring her here. Belle looked at him with surprise. You'd do that? Take in another refugee from my father's house? Jake smiled. This valley's got room for people who need a place to choose their own path. They planned careful. Jake would ride down to the Hawthorne ranch alone, claiming to be a horse trader looking for breeding stock. While Samuel showed him the horses, Belle would circle around to the back of the house where Emma's room was. They'd practice the signals, the timing, the escape route through the canyon that would be almost impossible to follow in the dark. But plans have a way of falling apart when they meet reality, and theirs began to crumble the moment Jake rode into Samuel Hawthorne's yard and found Edgar Hartwell waiting for him. Well, well, Hartwell said, his voice like gravel in a tin cup. Jake Colter, I heard you might show your face around here eventually. He kept his expression neutral, though his hand moved instinctive closer to his gun. Mr. Hartwell, I'm just here looking for horses. Are you now? Because I heard you might be here looking for something else. Someone else, maybe. Behind Hartwell, Samuel Hawthorne came out of the house with 3 armed men. Jake realized he'd ridden into a trap, that somehow they'd known he was coming. Where is she? Samuel demanded without warming up to it. Where's my daughter? I don't know what you're talking about. Don't play games with me, Colter. I know she's alive. I know she's with you, and I know you're here to steal another of my daughters. Jake's blood ran cold. If Bing knew about Emma, if they'd been watching and waiting. A scream from inside the house confirmed his worst fears. Emma's voice, high and terrified, calling for help. Jake moved toward the house, but Hartwell's men blocked his path, guns drawn. She tried to run, Samuel said, conversational, just like Belle did. But unlike Belle, Emma won't get the chance to shame her family. The wedding to young Hartwell takes place tonight, right here, right now. You can't force her to marry against her will. Ha! I can do whatever I want on my land with my own daughter. The only question is whether you'll be alive to see it. Jake counted the odds. 4 men against 1, all armed, all expecting trouble. In a straight fight, he might take 2 of them with him, maybe 3 if he was lucky. But that wouldn't save Emma, and it would leave Belle alone and unprotected. What do you want? He asked. Bring me Belle, alive and unmarried to you. Do that, and I'll let Emma choose her own husband from among the suitable men I approve of. And if I don't? Then Emma marries young Hartwell tonight, and you die in the morning. Either way, the shame of your interference in my family ends here. Jake looked toward the house where Emma's cries had been replaced by an ominous silence. He thought of Belle waiting in the canyon for his signal, trusting him to bring her sister to safety. He thought of the life they'd built together, the peace they'd found in the mountains, the future they'd planned. And then he thought of his sister Mary, who died because no one had been willing to stand up to powerful men who saw women as property to be traded. "I'll bring her," Jake said, quiet. "But I want to see Emma first. I want to know she's alive and unhurt." Samuel nodded to his men and they escorted Jake into the house. Emma was in the parlor, her dress torn, her face streaked with tears, but apparently uninjured. When she saw Jake, hope flared in her eyes. "Is Belle?" she whispered. "She's safe," Jake said, "and she's coming for you." But even as he said it, Jake was making different plans. Plans that would require him to trust that Belle was as strong and resourceful as he believed her to be. Plans that would ask everything of both of them. 2 hours later, Belle rode into the Hawthorne Ranch yard alone, her hands visible and empty, her horse moving at a slow walk. She looked older than when she'd left, more confident, but Jake could see the fear in her eyes as she took in the scene waiting for her. "Hello, Pa," she said, quiet. Samuel stepped forward, his face a mixture of rage and relief. "Belle, you've come home." "I've come for Emma." "Emma is no longer your concern. She's getting married tonight." "To a man who will beat her like his father beat his wives? I don't think so." Samuel's face darkened. "You don't get to think anymore, girl. You gave up that right when you ran away and brought shame on this family. You'll marry Edgar Hartwell as planned, or Emma pays the price for your rebellion." Belle looked at Jake, and he saw something in her expression that he recognized. The same quiet determination she'd shown when she'd faced down her father the first time. The same steel core that had kept her alive in the desert. "I have a better idea," she said. What happened next would be talked about in the territory for years to come. Belle Hawthorne Colter, the girl who'd been left to die in the desert, who'd found love and freedom in the mountains, who'd learned that sometimes the only way to save the people you love is to risk everything you've built. She challenged her father to a duel. Not with guns, though she'd learned to shoot during her time with Jake. Not with fists, though she'd grown strong working in the mountain air. She challenged him to a contest of truth, witnessed by everyone present, with the winner taking custody of Emma and the loser accepting the judgment of the community. "You want to call me shameful?" Belle said, her voice carrying clear in the evening air. "Then let's talk about shame. Let's talk about a man who leaves his daughter to die in the desert because she won't be sold like livestock. Let's talk about a father who beats one daughter to force the other into line. Let's talk about shame, Pa, and see who comes out dirtier." Samuel sputtered and raged, but Belle had chosen her battlefield well. There were witnesses now, neighbors who'd been called for Emma's forced wedding, people who'd known the Hawthorne family for years, people who were starting to murmur among themselves as Belle spoke, their faces showing doubt about Samuel's version of events. "She's lying," Samuel said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Am I?" Belle pulled up her sleeves, showing the faded but still visible scars from the ropes that had bound her wrists. "Are these lies, Pa?" She turned to face the crowd. "And how many of you knew Edgar Hartwell's wives? How many of you wondered why they kept having accidents? Why they kept dying so young?" Murmurs rippled through the gathered neighbors. Several people looked uncomfortable, and Jake realized that Belle's accusations weren't news to them. They were just things that had never been said out loud before. "And how many of you think it's right for a father to beat one daughter to force another into marriage? Because if that's the kind of community this is, if that's the kind of men you are, then I want nothing to do with any of you." The crowd was getting restless now, and Jake could see Samuel realizing that he was losing control of the situation. Desperate men make desperate choices, and Samuel Hawthorne was nothing if not desperate. He went for his gun. Jake was faster, but not by much. Both shots rang out almost at the same time, echoing across the ranch yard like thunder. Samuel's bullet went wide, but Jake's found its mark, taking Samuel in the shoulder and spinning him around. As Samuel fell, Edgar Hartwell made his own play for power, drawing on Jake while his attention was focused on Samuel. But he'd forgotten about Belle, who'd learned more than just cooking and herb gathering during her time in the mountains. The knife Jake had taught her to throw took Edgar in the chest, and he toppled backward off the porch with a look of surprise frozen on his face. In the sudden silence that followed, Emma's voice rang clear and strong. "I choose my own path. I choose to go with my sister." And that's how the story of Belle Hawthorne Colter became legend in that part of the territory. The woman who died in the desert and came back to life. The woman who faced down her father and won. The woman who saved her sister and built a life worth living in the mountains, where freedom rang like church bells every morning. Years later, when their own children asked about how their parents met, Jake and Belle would tell them the story simple. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is choose your own path, even when everyone else insists you're walking the wrong direction. Sometimes rescue comes not from being saved by someone else, but from finding the courage to save yourself. And sometimes love grows best in the quiet places, tended by people who understand that the most precious gift you can give another person is the freedom to be exactly who they are. Their children would grow up knowing that their worth wasn't measured by their usefulness to others, that their dreams mattered as much as anyone else's, and that home wasn't a place you were assigned to, but a place you chose to build with people who saw your heart and decided it was worth protecting. That's the end of Belle and Jake's story, but there are plenty more frontier tales where that came from. If you enjoyed this journey into the Old West, hit that subscribe button and ring the bell for Tony Tells Tales. Drop a comment below and let me know which frontier story you'd like to hear next. Until then, keep riding toward your own chosen path.